Today we're talking about the boot scootin' episode of The Real Housewives of Orange County. If you've been listening to the podcast all along, then you know that I was at the filming of this episode. And so I'm really excited to talk about it from both perspectives, being there at the moment and then watching it back, because it was, at the end of the day, it gave me a little insight to what it's like to watch yourself back some months later and then question your behavior or re-feel those feelings. So I'm going to get into it now. It starts off with Gretchen and Emily meeting at a hat shop to get cowboy hats made for the upcoming Innocence Center fundraiser. And if you watch The Housewives of Orange County, then you know that Emily has been involved with the Innocence Center in her capacity as, I believe, an ambassador. It's the way that she uses her law degree, and she has been involved in this cause for years. But Anthony Chairez is a young man who was wrongfully convicted at the age of 15. He was tried as an adult, and he spent 20 years in prison for a murder he did not commit. He was exonerated, and this fundraiser that the girls are getting the cowboy hats made for is to raise funds for Anthony, who now wants to go to mechanic school so that he could support his family because, he was 15 when he was incarcerated. He's such a nice guy. I met him at this fundraiser. I got interested in the Innocence Center maybe 3 years ago. I picked up on it on Instagram and I started following them. And then last season, Emily had Anthony on the show, featured him on the show, along with obviously the Innocence Center. I have had the pleasure of meeting with, chatting with Anthony, and I know a little bit of his story, but I'm very excited to tell you that Anthony will be joining us here on the podcast to tell you his story firsthand. You know, you guys, life has been lifing, but I did hear from Anthony just this last weekend, and he confirmed that, yes, he still does want to come on the podcast. So we'll get his story to you guys as soon as possible. It's a very compelling story. And the sad thing about it is that he is one of many. And we see that as we get into this week's episode. So the girls start to talk while they're shopping for their hats about what's going on with Tamra and what had happened at the spring fling. Emily's telling Gretchen all about it. And then eventually Emily tells Gretchen that, she's kind of upset with Tamra for meeting with Katie. And then Emily says that Gretchen really didn't need to bring up Tamra at the LA sleepover or whatever. And I guess that Gretchen just doesn't take to any sort of correction, because next thing you know, it sets her off and she gets defensive. And, Emily doesn't back down from a good fight. So the two start to engage OC style, and Emily has had enough and Gretchen walks out. So I don't even know if she ended up getting a hat, but for our consumption, that's where that scene ended, my friends. And then Gina goes to meet Tamra and eventually Heather at Las Brisas, one of my favorite restaurants in Laguna Beach. It's a Mexican themed restaurant. It overlooks the ocean. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And it's nostalgic and very personal to me. So you know what, you guys? I think I'm going to go there, like in the near future. And if so, of course, I'll cover it here on the podcast. I'll take pictures and it'll be one worth seeing. But they start to chat about none other than the spring fling meltdown, where we know Tamra quit no fewer than 5 times. And Gina kind of tries to talk her down and let her know that they're kind of on her side. But then Heather, when she joins them, the first thing she does is kind of try to soften her and let her know, like, look, I love you. And Tamra is just wound up really tightly. And you can tell that whatever it is that this girl's going through, she is not taking in emotions as much as she is able to let them out these days. So hopefully that changes. I've seen her on a couple of other things and I've heard her on her podcast, and it sounds like she's past this point. And this is probably what she was referring to when she was talking about it was the hardest season she's ever filmed, because this is somewhat of a shit show. Tamra is not having a good showing as far as, having, picking up her marbles and going home every 32 seconds. And it's just not cool. But even though the girls try to kind of ease and soften her heart, she's just upset about the whole thing and the fact that they feel like they can't trust her. And in essence, she's proving their point for them, literally, with this scene. Because if you can't come to your friends and tell them when they're wrong, obviously approach is everything. But if you can't do that, or if you can't have a moment where you're not in agreement and you're going to try to get through something, you can't do that if you don't have someone who is able to receive that sort of communication. And in this moment, Tamra just didn't look open. That's my opinion. And that's how I truly feel about it. So we move on to Shannon and Jen. And so Shannon's going over Jen's with Archie for a dog psychic meeting. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I love dogs, so I love this scene. And I got to see the Caesar Milan side of Jen Pedranti. But what I didn't like is that this scene gave filler, and I started thinking about it and I realized that, Jen's really had a good season. And in case you missed the last episode of the podcast, I revealed the seating chart for the reunion, and girlfriend got first chair next to Andy. So she definitely was giving first chair vibes this season. I think that these scenes, and there are a few of them spread out throughout the season, are for purposes of lending Shannon a storyline. Because if it weren't for these meetings with Jen, Shannon literally would be at home talking to Archie or FaceTiming the girls. And I'm not meaning that to be shady in any way, shape, or form. I'm just saying that there's not much going on there. And I think that this whole thing about going to get the psychics to evaluate the dogs was simply to give Shannon some airtime. But okay, everybody needs a paycheck, so get over it, Virginia. Let's move on. Crew, Willow, and Archie all get readings. And the big takeaway is that Archie doesn't feel neglected, but he needs a brother. So spoiler alert, Shannon has in fact gotten a brother for Archie, and so he is no longer lonely in current day. But who knows really what is in the mind of a dog? When I was watching this episode, I kept staring at Maya and Sophie, and Sophie was just looking at me like, what? What am I doing? What did I do? Why are you giving me attention? To the point where it made me laugh out loud. And Maya, on the other hand, had this inquisitive, deep look longingly into my eyes. And I just thought, geez Louise, if only these dogs could speak to me, and if only I could know what is really in their head, because the relationship that you have with your animals is unlike any other relationship, in my opinion. And it's something that I'm glad I have. Anybody who knows me is probably shocked by how included my pets have become in my life, but that is just what has happened. I've always had pets, but they were usually outdoor animals, and I didn't have to worry about, we're going on vacation, where are my babies going to stay? And that literally is the case now. But back to Orange County, the big, what we've all been waiting for. Tamra meets with Katie at Verde. Now, everybody is worked up about whether Tamra should or shouldn't be meeting with Katie. Tamra has decided that she doesn't give a hoot what anybody thinks. She's going to meet with Katie because she has been bothered by some of the things that have been said ever since it happened. And she feels like Katie deserves an ear because she did apologize to her and she's been honest with her ever since. So they meet and they get to talking, and it's really awkward. If I'm being honest, it was an awkward thing for me to watch because you kind of have no way of knowing where it's going to go. And Tamara's been so volatile lately that you kind of wonder if we're going to have one of those pop-off moments, but that doesn't happen. They have a pretty level-headed conversation whereby Katie tells Tamra that really it's Slade who is at the center of all of this. It's Slade who had been making the calls to Matt. It's Slade who all of a sudden just ghosted Matt. It's Slade who would be on a speaker when Gretchen and Katie were talking about the whole situation. And it's Slade who said that Katie needs to stick to the story, that nothing was said because there can be issues, including legal ones. And so apparently Matt has receipts, and we'll see. Another thing I spilled on the last podcast, you might remember, is the fact that Matt did in fact show up for filming of the reunion, but Ryan and Slade did not at the last minute. So could it be because Matt has receipts? And could it be because Slade is slimy? Dude, I sort of feel a little bit dirty for having taken a picture with him. Like, this is some shady shit, dude. Is this really who you are after all these years? Your main preoccupation is to get airtime on a housewives show? Shame on you, Slade Smiley. Go get a life. And you know what, Gretchen? Don't come after me because everybody else is thinking that. I'm just saying it too. Allegedly, yada, yada, yada. I want to take a minute to talk about Heather and Terry's cookie fundraiser with the Trevor Project and Junior's Cookie. It was a collaboration. The Trevor Project helps kids in crisis in the queer community, and Heather was doing a fundraiser with the Junior's Cookies, and they ended up donating $50,000. I want to tip my hat to these two because I was thinking about it, and I could not think of another couple on TV, current day, or even in the recent past, that are giving us this spin on parenting children in the queer community. It's always, sorry to say it, but it's always been kind of a negative spin. And we always hear about the children that get thrown out and, get taken in by so-and-so and so-and-so. These two are really showing acceptance and love as parents, and they're modeling that to all of us out here. And some of us are going to have kids that are in the queer community. So what a breath of fresh air to finally have a positive role model on how to handle this, as opposed to the stigma that people have, thrown out there all these years. So I have probably given this segment more time than they gave it on the show. And that's all I'm going to say about that. I'm very, very happy that Heather's fundraiser did make it to air, but they moved on. So I'm going to move on too. And we're back with Emily. And this time she's talking to Jasmine Harris. Jasmine Harris is the Director of Development and Policy at the Innocence Center. And Jasmine and I have become kind of friends. We were trying to work on a fundraiser in Temecula, and unfortunately, due to lack of funding, we've had to postpone that. But Jasmine's going to be coming on the podcast very soon. In fact, I'm interviewing her tomorrow, and I'm very excited to be able to share what she has to say. Jasmine, as head of policy, also goes to Congress and fights for grants and for rights for these exonerees. And it's not an easy job. So we'll hear more from her when she comes on the podcast. I'm super stoked about this interview because I want you guys to understand it, and I want you to recognize that when we were listening to Emily talk to Jasmine, they invited in the exonerees, and I met these guys at the gala that I attended later on, and you guys, they're just normal people who have had, a bad shake. And that doesn't mean all of them walk the straight and narrow. I mean, obviously, sometimes you're keeping bad company to be implicated in all of that, but I don't really care. At the end of the day, nobody should serve time for a crime they did not commit, point blank, period. And according to the show, the statistics were pretty staggering. Something like 100,000 people in our justice system are wrongfully convicted. And so the work that Jasmine does it's just completely selfless, and her team is amazing. And during this scene, they talked to Raphael, and Raphael was convicted or accused in 2000. The crime took place in LA, and he says he was in Rancho Cucamonga at the time, but it took 10 years to prove his innocence. And then there's Stefan, who was convicted of first-degree murder in LA, and that was in 2006, and he also served 20 years before he was exonerated. So this scene was important because it gave us numbers, and it helped us realize that this stuff does happen. Why? There's a lot of reasons. We'll talk more about it with Jasmine. I really hope that you guys will take the time to look into it and see if it might be something you want to support. Yeehaw, we're finally at the boot scootin', and this is at the Westwood Coast in Costa Mesa. It's a cute bar. I think I said that when I first did the podcast covering the filming, but it's really crazy because now I'm thinking about things and I'm putting things together. Do you guys remember that I said I drove up and Emily and Shane were parked next to me, and it looked like there was a producer there, and Emily looked kind of worked up? Well, it makes sense. I mean, she was hosting an event where Gretchen and she had just had an argument where Shannon was pissed off at Tamra. Tamra's pissed off at basically everybody. Heather's not mad at anybody, but Tamra thinks that Heather's mad at her. And then you have Jen, who's kind of floating among everybody. And it makes sense that this girl was like, oh my gosh, tonight's going to be a shit show. And if you watch the episode, it kind of turned out to be a little bit of a shit show. But it was weird to me because I couldn't understand the dynamics of who was talking to who and why people weren't standing next to people, which I would have expected, like Heather and Tamra. And it makes sense now because having watched the most recent episodes, you can see that they're going through a rough time right now. And they told Tamra that they don't trust her. And so she's kind of keeping her distance and sticking with Eddie, which is what we see and what I saw that night. I spent a couple of minutes, standing by them while they were chatting, and I didn't want to infringe on their conversation, but they were clearly, it was Terry, Heather, it was Terry, Eddie, and then Tamra walked up, but Heather was nowhere to be found. And that was when I happened to encounter her up on by the bar, and that's where you'll see the picture that I have. But it makes sense now because as soon as Terry walked over, as soon as Heather walked over, then Tamra walked away. And this is all stuff that makes sense to me now. But at the time I was like, okay, clueless. I'm just here, kind of having a good time, kind of watching what's going on, trying to pick up on the nuances, but not having had the benefit of watching all of the episodes we've just watched. How could I have figured all of this out? So Anthony is there. That's the first scene they show. He and Emily chatting, and that's he was mic'd, and there was a time when he and I were sitting at the table with his friend, and we were all kind of talking, and then something came up about him being mic'd, and he said, yeah, I thought you heard me earlier when I told you I was mic'd. And you could go back and listen to the other podcast if you want context for that. But anyway, shortly after that, they came and got him. And that was the interview that you see him talking to Emily, where he's like, yeah, I'm nervous and whatever. And he was nervous. Remember I said that? That's why I went and I got him a drink. And then Jasmine and I were chatting for a little bit. And then I moved out of the way because I could tell that they were probably filming. I didn't know for sure, but I thought they might be. And I had found a seat that was kind of hidden into a corner. And I kind of liked that because I could still see everything, but the cameras were standing in front of my table, which meant I wasn't going to be in the shot. Perfect. So it's a funny thing about editing because in the episode, you see Jen and Ryan arrive, and then you see, I can't remember, I think Tamra and Eddie arrive, and that didn't happen in that order. It was pretty empty. I was among the first few people there besides, the Innocence Center staff, and Anthony was there, and I was there, and then Ryan and Jen did arrive, and then Elizabeth Vargas arrived, and that was when I was talking to her, and she was telling me all about her new boyfriend and so on and so forth. I wonder if they're still together. I should look into that. Not right now, though. Let me keep going. So I was talking to her about that, and her friend was standing next to us. And then Elizabeth's boyfriend called, and then Anthony came over, and that's when he and I were talking. And there is a little snippet of Anthony standing there talking, holding our drinks, while Elizabeth was talking to, I believe it was Tamra, and I don't know who else, about the amount of people who have been wrongly accused, et cetera, et cetera. And so none of that happened in that order, which was amazing to see because remember I told you they were editing in that little room off to the side that very night. So these producers are pretty badass to be able to, put everything together in a way that is still cohesive and makes sense, but could honestly not be anything that really happened in the way it happened. And so it is true that you got to be careful what you do when you're on TV, because once they have it, they could do whatever they want with it. And, but they can't put on television words you don't say or things you don't do. So you just have to be mindful of that. And I wish I had been that night, but that's a conversation for a little bit later. Let's move on. So Elizabeth Vargas goes off and goes to talk to other people. Anthony and Lauren and I went and sat back down, and we got some munchies. And then Emily went up and spoke, and that was, and then Jasmine went up and spoke. And I think we see a little bit of that. And here's yours truly walking behind the crowd with my red phone up in the air, filming the moment. So, of course, I'll post it on Instagram for you, but I felt like a dumbass in the moment when I saw it on television. And it only gets worse for me from here on, but we're talking about the show, so I'm going to go back to that. Heather and Terry, and they show up, and he has his medical caduceus line jacket, which was kind of a moment that night. He was showing it off to anybody and everybody who would walk up to him. And then Gina and Travis, they snuck in. Like nobody even kind of knew that they were there. All of a sudden, you see Gina talking to Heather, I think, just kind of like saying hello. And I didn't see Gina go near Emily, which I thought was kind of weird, but I was behind the group, and this is about the time that they started getting to the line dancing. So it kind of looked like they were waiting for all the primaries to get there before they really started the events, but they did the speeches about like right at the beginning. So then we see Doc Holliday, Shannon, that duster was a bad fashion choice. I don't like to shame people. You'll very rarely hear me talk shit about someone's appearance or about what they were wearing on this podcast, unless I really just can't hold my tongue. But for the most part, that's not my go-to. And girl, this was not your look. I mean, when you were showing Sophie on FaceTime, she said, don't do it. When you showed up that night, sorry, Shannon, you were super sweet to me and I loved you, but I was a little perplexed by your outfit. And it was validated and completely proven correct when I saw it on the episode. Not your best fashion moment, Shannon Bedore. But then it turns out that Emily is going to kind of turn around the course of the evening. Now, Virginia sitting there at Westwood Coast has no idea this is going on, but I could see the energy level change. And you may recall that I said that when I covered the filming, because all of a sudden people started buzzing all over the place. Well, we now know that what that was that Emily started telling the girls about how Tamra met with Katie. Now, to spend a couple of minutes really telling you about how the sausage is made, and for context, we then see that Eddie and Tamra show up, and we see Gretchen and Slade walking in kind of right at the last minute. None of that really happened. Everybody had gotten there early enough, and the timing again was a situation of editing. Gretchen had a couple of cocktails, and I could hear her from across the room. Her volume goes up when she drinks, and that was just a firsthand observation. Don't come at me for it. I was just watching and listening. But anyway, they kind of make it look like they showed up and then this stuff popped off, and it didn't. It kind of built a little bit more than that. And I have a feeling that Gretchen was sitting with this information for a while, but what we see on television is a little bit different. And I was sitting not more than 4 feet away from this whole thing, and the camera was standing basically in front of me. So I had an amazing view of this, but you don't really get to hear what's going on. So it's kind of interesting to see how by changing the sequence of things, they tell the same story, but not really how it actually occurred. And I say that because at this point in the evening, in real time, everybody shows up, Jasmine talks, Emily talks, and then they did the line dancing, and they really did spend a good amount of time on the line dancing. And that is the time during which these little scenes that we saw were being filmed. I was on the floor line dancing because you may or may not recall that this was a bucket list item for me, and I checked it off that night. And there was a cute little girl. You might have seen her on the show. She was wearing a white fringe dress, and she stood next to me. We danced together. We had a great time. And by this time I was hanging out with Michelle, and they show a point in the episode where Perry, Shane's mom, and Larry, Shane's dad, show up for the evening. And you may or may not recall that they were sitting at our table. So they did come over. I said hi to them. They sat at our table for a little while with Shane's sister and Michelle, Shane's sister's best friend. And then eventually somebody from production came and got them and moved them to the other side. And that's where you see them in the episode itself, say hi to Shannon and so on and so forth. And then you see Perry take to the dang dance floor, and girlfriend was having the time of her life. And it was just a really cute moment to see firsthand. And then to see them show pieces of it on the show was heartwarming to watch all over again. At this point in the episode, Anthony gets up and speaks, and he did that in the very, very beginning. That was why I bought him the drink, because he was nervous because he knew he had to go on camera and make a speech. And we'll talk about that when he comes on, because it was a cute moment and he did a great job. And but they showed it obviously closer to the end, and then they start to show basically just clips of people hanging out and dancing. And if you notice, it's really kind of empty. Those clips are from later in the evening, but this is where it gets a little bit crazy. So we see that Emily tells Jennifer about the meeting that Tamra had with Katie. And she tells her that Tamra's pissed because Katie said that basically Slade was at the center of everything. And so Jen takes this information in, and then within a few seconds, she goes and tells Gretchen. So Gretchen decides that Slade should confront the issue. So then panic ensues. It gets back to the other girls that Gretchen and Slade are getting ready to confront Tamra. Heather's mortified. Shannon thinks it's a terrible idea. And then Gretchen decides that she is going to walk up to Tamra and just say hi. Well, this is the same moment that Michelle and Virginia saw that Tamra and Eddie were getting ready to walk out, and it occurred to both of us that we had not yet taken a picture. So indeed, we got up, we walked over, and if you watch, you can see that we are total photobombing the moment. It's really embarrassing, and because of the moment that it is, it's one of those moments it's going to get replayed over and over more than likely. So kind of funny moment for me. But as far as the episode, which is what you're really here to hear about, what ended up happening at that very moment was that Tamra had basically, as soon as she saw Gretchen, said no. And then Gretchen was screaming at her, "Run, bitch, run." And you see that they walk out and Eddie is flipping them off. And Tamra was saying something like "F you." It was not a good moment. And then if you remember, when I talk about it on the podcast, I say that I walked outside and the cameras hit me in the face because they were out there interviewing Tamra and Eddie. Well, that's what you see after, when Tamra is kind of scolding Eddie for flipping people off, saying that that wasn't very nice either, and so on and so forth. So again, the way they take these moments and piece them together to tell the same story is mind-boggling. And it's really kind of cool to see how the sausage is made. But I saw that everybody was starting to trickle out after that. And I did stay for the pictures that you see them taking, because I have one of those that I did post on my Instagram with basically the whole cast except for Tamra and Katie, for obvious reasons. But it ended with Emily kind of talking to Gretchen about why she starts arguing and so on and so forth. And then Emily and Gretchen start to get into it, and Gretchen and Slade still think they've done nothing wrong. And it just gets to be a shit show. Thankfully, they somewhat catch themselves and are like, hey, we're at a fundraiser, we're at an event, blah, blah, blah. I'll be honest with you, in real time, it didn't come across as a big scene. There was a lot of other noise in there, so I think that fared well for them. And at that point, most of the people were either really buzzed or full-blown engaged in their dancing, or had left. So I left, I remember, right around this time, because I wasn't there much longer after the mortifying moment. I stayed for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. So next week, the ladies are going to Amsterdam, and I hear that now Heather falls out with Jennifer, I think it is. Hi, these girls. Honestly, I would never go on a girls' trip with these ladies. There's no way in the world you could catch me on a girls' trip with these ladies. Now, maybe some combination thereof, but the group as a whole together plus me, no, that would never work. And speaking of other groups that I would never travel with, I'm going to move right on in to Real Housewives of Miami Reunion Part 2. Now, to be fair, I would travel with some of these ladies, but collectively, probably not. And as Andy says in this episode of the reunion, he would have taken the plane. Me too. I would have definitely followed Stephanie's rules and taken her PJ. So there you have it. Color me shallow. We're picking up with the bombshell from last week where Julia tells us all that she slept with Adriana, and that is why their relationship has fallen apart. She says that Martina does know about it, but she says that she brings it up because she was tired of being, as she later says, blackmailed. She calls it psychological abuse. And to clarify, Adriana says she never scissored anybody. And almost all of the girls think that there was a hookup. When Andy asked, everybody raised their hand with some iteration of yes. And so it's out there. There was a hookup. Nobody's really denying it. And then there's the Haitian mortician comment. What the hell? And the cop. So apparently Miss I'm never going to betray you and I was never going to say anything suddenly got loose lips and divulges that Julia was also with a Haitian mortician who she apparently had to buy a coffee maker for, and a cop. And when asked if Martina knows about this, Julia says that she does know about it all. And she doesn't deny any of it. It's so they go to a break, and then Julia is following Andy off the set. And they add more mishap to misery. They start talking about the fact that there was another hookup or encounter at the Versace Museum, which was at Alexia's bachelorette party a couple of seasons back. So sadly, Basquait is godmotherless as a result of these tragic events. And Julia says they were indeed intimate, but out of respect, she's not going to talk details. So the rest of the break that these ladies have is just filled with shade. Back on the set, did Adriana ask Julia to really leave Martina for her? Adriana says, back on set, because they're still riled up. Adriana just picked a reason to be riled up. She barges in and talks about how they're preparing their answers, and they weren't doing that. They were talking shit, but they weren't preparing their answers. So I think Adriana's a little bit paranoid and a lot of bit activated, because when they go back to the set, the first thing that she does is spew out the fact that Adriana tried to F her in Spain. And then Adriana has this moment where she gets up and she walks over and she hands her a box, and there's some jokes about Marisol's liver, ha ha ha, and it's a heart in a box. And then she gives her this, you stole my heart, you broke my heart, so now you could keep it. The whole thing was ridiculous. And Adriana, I love you to pieces. I really do. I could totally do without these reunion moments from you. Um, Thankfully, after the break, we move on to Kiki and we hear about the death threats that her family had been giving her. And then, her family in Haiti who wanted to come here. We heard about that during the season. And then we hear about her journey with her dad. Kiki says that she does have daddy issues and they're not working things out yet. And as a result of her daddy issues, she's decided to be celibate since March of 2024. And there's a little bit more talk about that. And then Kiki tells us that she is getting ready to go out with a gentleman that Marisol introduced her to. And Marisol thinks that it's a nice guy. And that from her reaction, Marisol definitely thinks that Kiki is coming up by scoring this man who she's apparently known, Marisol that is, for 30 years. So we then move on and we talk about the Chihuahua comment, and we have the show and tell analogy that, it makes sense. But when we get to the racism and the classism and all of that that's being brought up at the end but not discussed, I'm bothered because I'm trying to figure out what the hell is going on this here part 2 of the reunion. Why are we just fragmenting all of these accusations? Andy usually does a better job, in my opinion, sorry, Mr. Cohen, of stopping people in their tracks and hashing this shit out and not letting people just spew out things that are not, explained or that are unfounded. Anyway, Stephanie and Alexia agree that they're very similar. And so we move on and we talk a little bit about Stephanie and the fact that, they've made up for the most part. And then we have the segment with Larsa and follow or unfollow gate, which I'm not even going to get into again. I'm so sick of talking about it. And the next is the Chat GPT version of Larsa. Andy asks if it was infidelity, and Larsa says she wishes it was just that. What? I don't know what the hell's going on here, but this girl is really... I don't understand why she's still even talking about this relationship when she is clearly moving on and getting ready to become Mrs. Jeff Kobe by the end of the year, which, girlfriend, you've got a month and a half. Not that much longer. Well, 2.5 months. Sorry, my bad on the math. Anyway, as the episode starts to end, Lisa's father's passing is brought up, and we're going to deal with that, I guess, on episode 3. She does talk a little bit about how she was glad that she had the moment, and that's why she encouraged Kiki to fix her relationship with her dad because time is fleeting. And you know what, you guys? It is. Time is fleeting. Make the best of every moment you have in life. Oh gosh, now I'm on a soapbox. I'm going to move on. That's it for Miami this week. But darn, it's a busy time in reality TV and therefore for the podcast. And it's all good stuff. Well, Real Housewives of Potomac started, and I wasn't going to cover it, but with all the recent beef with Dr. Wendy and Happy Eddie, I wonder if she'll be doctor. Yeah, well, they can't strip her of her doctorate, right? They can only excuse her from her position. Did you guys hear about that? That's the latest update. I talked about the Happy Eddie and Dr. Wendy news in the last podcast. Go back and listen if you haven't yet. But the latest update is apparently she has been relieved of her duties from the university and is no longer teaching there. And then this morning I saw some post somewhere where it showed that she is saying that she resigned from her position. There's going to be a lot going on, and it really does change watching the episode, because the latest episode aired on Sunday, and I was watching it very differently than I was last Sunday before this news broke. And I keep threatening to talk to you about 90 Day the Other Way. I do have a co-host that I want to launch this with. We're having a couple of scheduling issues, but we're trying to work it out, I promise. And if the season doesn't get away from us, we're still going to try to make it happen. And then, we are covering Salt Lake City. I'm super excited about upcoming interviews with Jasmine Harris of the Innocence Center and Anthony Chairez, an exoneree from the Innocence Center Foundation. Just wanted to remind you guys that BravoCon is coming up. I will be there. We'll be covering BravoCon all weekend, both live and we're working on some collaborations. So hopefully we can make some of those come through, and I'll tell you more about them when I can. And as we wrap up today, I have a beauty tip for you and a health update. So first, my beauty tip is my latest, most exciting find, which is my dry brush. So what is a dry brush? Well, it is a brush that you use that you don't wet, and you use it to brush off your skin before you get into the shower. I was introduced to the dry brush at a massage on the cruise, the European cruise over the summer, and they tried to get me to buy one, but I had bought all kinds of other things, so I never bought it. And I think I may have talked about buying my dry brush. The one I have is the Elemis Body Detox Skin Brush. It can be purchased at Amazon for $45. One of the other brushes that scored really high in the dry brush area was the Goop Beauty Detox Ultimate Dry Brush, and that could be purchased at Amazon for $25. And then if you don't really want to spend a lot of money, but you want to figure out, is Virginia full of shit or is this real? Try the Best Bore Bristle Body Brush. That can be purchased. It's on sale right now for $7 at Amazon. So what do? I use it every morning, or if you shower in the evening, use it in the evening before you shower. Start at the soles of your feet and work your dry brush up the skin with long sweeping movements toward the heart, focusing on areas that are prone to cellulite and dryness. And then in my case, mine comes with an extender handle, so you could use it for your back and stuff. And why do we do this? Well, consistently using dry brushes significantly, reduce our ingrown hairs and improve the skin texture on the arm and legs. And according to experts, dry brushing, which is an ancient Ayurvedic practice, aids blood circulation and lymphatic detoxification to help the body eliminate toxins and reduce water retention. So there are a lot of really good benefits. For me, I'm in love with it because I don't have scaly, ashy looking skin anymore, and I'm loving the texture. And I just wish I had started doing this years ago, because it takes literally 90 seconds, couple minutes, and it's made a world of difference. So that's my beauty tip. As far as my health tip, I don't really have a health tip. What I have is a health update. So if you know me, then you know your girl likes her vodka sodas. And I noticed recently that I have some upper belly bloating, and I don't like it. And this might be too much information. So if it is, this is the point in the podcast where you want to say, I'm done listening, but I hope you'll listen, because I'm going to tell you about a product that I purchased, and I started it today, and they are not a sponsor. However, if you want to sponsor me, please do. And I'm talking about Dose for Your Liver. And the reason I want to try it is because apparently it will help flush your liver, and it helps release other toxins. It is 0 calories, Essentially, it is a proprietary blend of milk thistle, which milk thistle is known to break unwanted elements and ensures optimal liver function, and then turmeric. And we know turmeric has a million uses, but a healthy liver and enzyme function is way up on the top of what turmeric is known to be good for. And this one has 0 sugar and 0 calories. And basically, you consume at any time, preferably after meals or after drinking. And I was concerned with what it was going to taste like. It was delicious. I'm actually looking forward to my next dose. So the reason I'm sharing this with you is hopefully Dose will sponsor me and I won't need to purchase my next dose. But if that doesn't happen, it's because I'm going to update you in about 30 days and let you know whether or not this worked for me. It has a 30-day guarantee, or they'll give me my money back. And so if I don't notice any change, then I'll send it back. No harm, no foul, and I can save you the time, effort, and money. But if it works, how awesome. It's natural. It's relatively affordable. It's better than cirrhosis of the liver. I'm just kidding. I've gotten dark. Anyway, that is my update with regards to my health. I'm doing dose and I am dry brushing and I am watching all the things and prepping for all the interviews. And I am out here doing my best. I want to send a special shout out to my friend who had surgery today. You know who you are. I love you, my friend. I hope you're healing and recovering quickly, and I'll be there to see you very, very soon. I am going to get off the mic, go have some lunch. I will be here living on the verge. Bye.